Living Doll. Living Doll is the 126th episode of the classic American anthology series, The Twilight Zone. In this story, a family's issues spiral out of control when their child's doll turns out to have a mind of its own. Annabelle decides to buy her daughter, Christy, a wind-up doll called Talkie Tina, to cheer her up. When you wind it up, the doll says, "My name is Talkie Tina, and I love you very much." Annabelle has recently tied the knot with Eric Streeter, a man who can't have kids. Frustrated by this, Eric takes out his anger on Christy and gets annoyed with Annabelle for spending money on the doll. Annabelle tries to convince him that if he opens his heart, he can learn to love Christy. One day, when Eric is by himself, he winds up the doll, but instead of its usual phrase, it starts saying things like, "I don't like you." Initially, he thinks there's something wrong with the doll. But when it starts having a full-on conversation with him, he suspects Annabelle is pulling a prank to get back at him for how he treats Christy. He tosses the doll in the trash can in the garage, but then he gets a call and hears the doll's voice threatening him. When he checks the trash can, it's empty. He confronts Annabelle, but she insists she didn't do anything. It hits Eric that since Annabelle was upstairs putting Christy to bed, she couldn't have made the phone ring. He rushes upstairs to discover the doll snuggled up in bed with Christy. Eric yanks the doll away, ignoring Christy's tearful pleas, and angrily reprimands her for calling him Daddy. He tries to destroy the doll using a vise, a blowtorch, and a circular saw, but nothing works. Annabelle tries to step in, but he shoves her aside in a fit of rage. He then shoves the doll into a burlap sack and tosses it back in the trash, weighing the lid down with bricks. Annabelle starts packing her things, fed up with his aggressive and irrational behavior. She suggests he should see a psychiatrist. Eric begins to doubt if the doll is really talking to him or if it's all in his head, and he offers to give it back to Christy if Annabelle stays. He retrieves the doll from the trash and hands it back to Christy. Later that night, Eric is jolted awake by strange noises. He tells Annabelle to stay put and heads out to check it out. Christy is still in bed, but Tina is missing. As he goes down the stairs, he trips over Tina, who's lying on one of the steps, and he falls, suffering fatal injuries. Annabelle, drawn by the commotion, finds Eric's lifeless body. Next to him, Tina opens her eyes and menacingly says, "My name is Talkie Tina, and you'd better be nice to me." Realizing Eric was right all along, Annabelle drops the doll in shock. Bernard Herrmann's score features a solo bass clarinet, enhanced by the sounds of harps and celesta. The house shown in this episode also appeared in the Twilight Zone episode Ring-a-Ding Girl from 1963. The doll that played Talkie Tina was made by the Vogue Doll Company between 1959 and 1961 and was sold under the name Briquette. Interestingly, Briquette didn't actually talk. In the Twilight Zone, she was inspired by Chatty Cathy, a well-known talking doll from Mattel that was popular when Living Doll first aired. June Foray, a prominent voice actress of that time, lent her voice to both Chatty Cathy and Talkie Tina. Living Doll gets a funny twist in Clown Without Pity, a segment from The Simpsons' Treehouse of Horror 3. In this bit, Homer gifts Bart a talking Krusty the Clown doll for his birthday, but things take a dark turn when the doll tries to off Homer. The episode Good Will Haunting from Sabrina the Teenage Witch also pokes fun at it with a Molly Dolly doll that threatens Sabrina. Plus, Living Doll makes an appearance in the Little Talkie Tabitha episode of Johnny Bravo. Interestingly, Gabby Gabby from Toy Story 4, 2019, is said to be inspired by Talkie Tina, as noted by director Josh Cooley. No More Mr. Nice Guy. The pilot episode of the American horror anthology series Freddy's Nightmares is called No More Mr. Nice Guy. In this episode, Freddy Krueger, portrayed by Robert Englund, returns to the screen, bringing back the iconic character he made famous in Wes Craven's 1984 film A Nightmare on Elm Street. It premiered on Sunday, October 9th, 1988. The episode No More Mr. Nice Guy kicks off the first season of Freddy's Nightmares, A Nightmare on Elm Street, the series. Here's the scoop. Fred Krueger is a notorious child killer from Springwood, Ohio. He managed to lure over 20 kids to his creepy boiler room where he brutally murdered them. After being caught, he goes to trial, showing up in his iconic brown derby and a red and green striped sweater. But thanks to a legal loophole, the court can't keep him locked up, and he walks free. Furious, the townspeople decide to take matters into their own hands. They find Freddy in his boiler room and trap him inside, then set the place ablaze. Freddy perishes in the flames, but this isn't the end of his story. He rises from the ashes as a twisted, demonic figure, haunting the dreams of Elm Street's children. This is the kickoff episode of the series. Freddy's Nightmares follows a similar vibe to other horror anthology shows like Tales from the Crypt, with Freddy Krueger stepping in as the host, dishing out creepy and bizarre stories. This episode is one of two that are linked to the A Nightmare on Elm Street storyline, with the next one being Sister's Keeper. While both episodes connect to the larger A Nightmare on Elm Street universe, there are some inconsistencies in the backstory and how they fit into the film series. Freddy Krueger first appeared in the original A Nightmare on Elm Street back in 1984, which hinted at events from this episode but didn't show them visually at the time. Director Tobe Hooper, famous for the classic 1974 slasher The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, also directed other notable films like Eaten Alive, Poltergeist, and The Mangler. Merritt Blocker, Lisa Blocker, and Sarah Blocker all come back for Sister's Keeper. There are scenes featuring Freddy's trial in the 2010 documentary Never Sleep Again, The Elm Street Legacy. This episode marks the first time we see Freddy Krueger before he got burned, and we'll catch another glimpse of pre-burned Freddy in the 1991 movie Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare. Actress Gwen E. Davis will return as the judge in episode 1 Wait, Mother's Day. This episode's title might nod to No More Mr. Nice Guy, a classic rock song by Alice Cooper from his 1973 album Billion Dollar Babies. Fun fact, Alice Cooper also played Edward Underwood, Freddy Krueger's adoptive dad, in some flashback scenes from Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare. In this episode, Freddy Krueger says the line, "I am forever." Another horror legend known for similar lines is Daniel Robitaille, or Candyman from the Candyman series, along with Pinhead from Hellraiser. The Vanishing of Will Byers. Chapter 1. The Vanishing of Will Byers kicks off the first season of Stranger Things. This episode was crafted by the Duffer Brothers and made its debut on Netflix on July 15, 2016, alongside the entire season. The synopsis. While heading home from a friend's place, young Will encounters something truly frightening. Meanwhile, a dark secret hides within the walls of a government lab. The plot. On November 6, 1983, in Hawkins, Indiana, a scientist is seen sprinting down a corridor at Hawkins National Laboratory, trying to escape an unseen threat. He hops into an elevator, only to discover that the danger is right there with him, lurking on the ceiling, leading to his demise as the doors shut. Four best buddies, Mike Wheeler, Dustin Henderson, Lucas Sinclair, and Will Byers, are deep into a game of Dungeons and Dragons in Mike's basement. They're up against a fierce foe called the Demogorgon. Will, playing the cleric, feels the heat from Dustin and Lucas to pick between a safer protective spell or a risky fireball. He goes for the fireball, but gets so hyped that he sends the dice flying off the table. Just then, Mike's mom, Karen, steps in and tells them it's time to wrap it up since school is tomorrow. Dustin tries to give Mike's sister Nancy some leftover pizza, but she totally brushes him off. He grumbles to the group that she used to be way cooler before she started dating that jerk, Steve Harrington, and the others, except Mike, nod in agreement. As they're about to head out, Will tells Mike he rolled too low, and the Demogorgon got him. The lights in Mike's garage flicker as his friends say their goodbyes. Riding through the dark past the lab, Will's bike light suddenly goes out. When it flickers back on, he spots a tall, shadowy figure right in front of him. He swerves off the road and crashes into the woods. Panicking, he takes off running toward home, with the figure chasing after him. When he gets there, he finds the house empty. He tries to call 911, but all he hears is a bunch of static. Then he notices a dark shape moving on his porch. To his shock, the locked front door seems to open on its own from the inside, so he bolts to the backyard shed. He grabs a rifle, loads it, and points it at the door as the lights above him start to flicker. Suddenly, the figure looms up behind him, and as Will turns to confront it, the lights brighten before returning to normal, leaving both him and the figure vanished. The following morning, Police Chief Jim Hopper wakes up in his trailer. While he's in the shower, a news report mentions power outages happening all over the county. After a quick smoke, a pill, and a beer, he gets dressed and heads out for work. Meanwhile, Will's mom, Joyce, and his older brother, Jonathan, start to worry since he didn't come home the night before. Joyce calls Karen Wheeler to check if Will stayed over, but Karen tells her he left shortly after 8 p.m. At Hawkins Middle School, Will's friends are also curious about his whereabouts, but they get interrupted by bullies Troy Walsh and James Dante. Over at Hawkins High, Nancy's best friend, Barb Holland, asks if she's dating Steve, which Nancy quickly denies. She then discovers a note in her locker from Steve asking to meet in the bathroom, making Barb smirk. In the bathroom, Nancy and Steve share a kiss and plan to study together later that night. Joyce heads over to the police station, pleading with Hopper to help find Will. Hopper seems pretty unfazed, pointing out that most of the time, missing kids are just with a parent or relative. His first move is to reach out to Joyce's ex, Lonnie, even though Joyce is adamant that he's not involved. Meanwhile, a group of sharply dressed men, led by Dr. Martin Brenner, makes their way into Hawkins' lab, all suited up in hazmat gear. They head down to the basement, where the air is thick with odd particles and the walls are marked in black. They spot a big hole in the wall, oozing a gray substance that looks like it's alive. One of the men turns to Brenner, asking if that's where it came from and what about the girl. Brenner replies that she can't have gone too far. A young girl in a hospital gown with a shaved head is wandering barefoot through the woods when she stumbles upon a diner named Benny's Burgers. She sneaks in through the back entrance. Benny Hammond, the owner, catches her in the act of stealing some food. Meanwhile, at school, a group of boys talks to their science teacher, Scott Clark, and find out that a powerful radio for their AV club has just arrived. Before they can get their hands on it, they're summoned to the office to meet Hopper and Deputy Phil Callahan. The boys explain Will's usual route home, mentioning Mirkwood, the nickname they gave to a road he takes. When they offer to help search for Will, Hopper firmly tells them to stay put. As Joyce and Jonathan look for Will near his fort in the woods, Castle Byers, Joyce reminisces about the time she surprised him there with tickets to Poltergeist. Benny Hammond prepares burgers for the girl and tries to strike up a conversation, but she stays quiet. He spots a tattoo that says 011 on her left forearm, and she seems to recognize it as her name by pointing to herself. Thinking she might be a victim of abuse, Benny decides to call social services. While he's on the phone, the girl manages to stop a loud, annoying fan just by staring at it. Meanwhile, Hopper, Callahan, and Deputy Calvin Powell are searching Mirkwood and come across Will's abandoned bike. At Hawkins' lab, several workers are eavesdropping on phone calls, including one where Joyce is frantically trying to reach Lonnie, but is interrupted by his girlfriend, Cynthia. Hopper arrives at the Byers' house with Will's bike and starts searching the place. He notices the Byers' dog barking at the shed, so he goes to check it out. The lights in the shed flicker off just as Callahan interrupts him. Hopper tells him they need to get a search party together. During dinner, Mike pleads with his mom to let him look for Will, while Nancy wants to go meet Barb for some studying. Karen shuts down both ideas. As Nancy and Mike bicker, he spills the beans to their parents that she's dating Steve, which makes Nancy storm off in a huff. Feeling like he's the only one who cares about Will, Mike angrily leaves the table too. Karen gives Ted a hard time for not stepping up with their older kids. Meanwhile, Clark and Hopper are chatting about Will while out on the search, and Hopper mentions he has a daughter living with her mom. A bystander then tells Clark that Hopper's daughter actually passed away years ago. Mike uses his supercom to call Lucas, explaining that Will put himself in danger during the game by casting a fireball instead of playing it safe with a protection spell. Lucas gets it and suggests they meet up in 10 minutes. Mike sneaks out on his bike and spots Steve trying to sneak into Nancy's window. They share an awkward moment before Mike just shrugs it off and rides away. Hammond manages to get 11 to smile, but then a social services rep knocks on the door. Connie Frazier introduces herself as from social services, but then she suddenly shoots and kills Hammond. 11 bolts for the back door, only to run into 2 armed agents. Dr. Brenner, who's coming in through the front, hears the chaos at the back and finds the agents who tried to stop 11 are dead, realizing she's escaped out the back. Steve attempts to charm Nancy while helping her study, but he ends up being more of a tutor than a flirt. Meanwhile, as a storm brews, Joyce and Jonathan sift through family photos to find one for missing posters. Jonathan, who worked late the night before, feels guilty about Will's disappearance, but Joyce reassures him it's not his fault. Suddenly, the phone rings, and Joyce picks it up. Initially, she thinks she hears Will's breathing, but then it shifts to a strange growl. The call gives her a little shock with a jolt of electricity. In the woods, the 3 boys are on a mission to find Will. Dustin urges the others to head back because of the storm and the fact that they're heading to the spot where Will went missing, especially since they're unarmed. Just then, they hear something rustling nearby and turn to find 11 standing there. Production. The first episode of what we now know as Stranger Things was initially called Montauk Pilot. It was set in Montauk, which was the original concept for the show. Even though the title changed when the show did, the script stayed pretty much the same. The Duffer Brothers, who created the series, wrote and directed this episode. The Vanishing of Will Byers premiered on Netflix on July 15, 2016. The reception. The episode got a thumbs up from critics. Pop Matters mentioned that the show captures fear and the 80s so perfectly, you'd think Netflix had some mad scientist whip up a special serum to make it super binge-worthy. Travel Spots also had a good time with the episode. The Duffer Brothers snagged nominations for the Primetime Emmy Awards for both outstanding writing and directing for this episode. They also received a nod from the Directors Guild of America for outstanding directorial achievement in a drama series for The Vanishing of Will Byers. Other team members also picked up some awards for their contributions to the episode.